The courtroom was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind that presses on your chest, like something heavy, invisible, and ancient. You could hear everything: the ticking of the clock, the shuffle of a page, the creak of the judge's chair, each sound sharp as a crack in cold stone. Khalil Dawson stood there, 17, hands cuffed in front, jumpsuit too big, eyes on the floor, not moving, not speaking. He hadn't said much since the night they slammed him face first on the concrete. Behind him, his mother, Ms. Nina Dawson, sat in the third row, both hands clenched in her lap like she was holding back the earth from splitting in two. Her eyes, red, swollen, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. She hadn't rested in days, only prayed, only begged, only hoped someone would listen before it was too late. The judge didn't look up right away, didn't say good morning, didn't even glance at Khalil. He just flipped a few papers, sighed, then spoke like he was ordering a sandwich.
In the case of the state of Georgia versus Khalil Dawson, this court finds the defendant guilty on all charges.
There was no pause, no wait, no mercy, just a sentence, delivered like it had already been decided before the boy even walked into the room. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. That was it. And somewhere in the silence that followed, something broke. Nina gasped, not like a scream, but like air had been punched from her chest. She tried to stand, but her knees gave way and she crumpled. Her elbows scraped the marble. Her palms hit the ground hard. Her mouth opened, but the words came out broken.
No, please, he didn't do this.
Her voice cracked like a dried leaf underfoot. A mother's voice, a voice full of truth the court refused to hear. And no one moved. Not the bailiff, not the guards, not even the man in the suit who stood beside her son and called himself a lawyer. The judge didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't say a word. Just like the system that built him, he stayed still. And Khalil, he didn't cry, didn't ask why, didn't even lift his head. In his cuffed hands, he held a small folded piece of paper, edges worn, creased, faint charcoal smudging the corners, a sketch of his mother, reading under the old lamp in their living room. He had drawn it the night before he was arrested. Now it was shaken between his fingers. The bailiff stepped forward.
Let's go.
And Khalil walked. No fight, no sound, just one last glance over his shoulder toward his mother still on the floor, reaching for him, her lips moving like she was praying or maybe just trying to breathe. The side door clicked shut behind him, and just like that, the courtroom moved on. The next case was called, like he'd never been there, like his life was just a clerical error. He wasn't sentenced, he was erased. But before the jumpsuit, before the cuffs, before the gavel carved a boy's name into stone, Khalil Dawson was just a quiet kid with a pencil and a dream. Before the courtroom, before the jumpsuit, Khalil was just a quiet boy living on the second floor of a weathered apartment building on Westmore Street. One bedroom, one couch, one tiny kitchen with a fridge that hummed loud at night. They didn't have much, but it was home. And for Khalil, that was enough. He didn't talk much, didn't seek attention, didn't run with big crowds, but Khalil noticed things. He noticed the way his English teacher clenched her jaw when grading papers, how the sunlight spilled across the schoolyard at exactly 4:18 p.m., how a bus driver's hands trembled just a little when the engine stalled. Khalil carried all of it in silence, and later he let it out in graphite and paper. He loved to draw, not for likes, not for praise, but because that's how he processed the world. Pencil was his voice, paper was his breathing space. His sketchbook went with him everywhere, to school, to lunch, to the bus stop. Its pages were filled with faces, a classmate resting their chin on their fist, his mother dozing on the couch with a paperback on her chest, an old man selling flowers at the corner near Fifth Street, corners of their life, quietly held together in charcoal. He didn't post them online, didn't boast. He just saved them, each scan carefully labeled on a beat-up flash drive. There was one place Khalil felt seen, the county library, 6 blocks from school, tucked in the back corner near the genealogy section. That's where the old scanner lived. It was slow, but clean, and it never judged. Every day after school, he'd walk in. Miss Gloria, the librarian, would spot him from her desk.
Back again, Khalil? These art schools won't know what hit them when they see your work.
He would blush, nod politely.
Thank you, Miss Gloria.
Khalil was applying for the Art Future Scholarship, a national competition. It was a long shot, thousands of applicants, but he had hope. When his English teacher gave him the recommendation letter, he didn't say a word to anyone. He tucked it carefully into his sketchbook, inside the back cover, and walked home slowly, like he was carrying something sacred. That night, he stopped by Martinez Market, picked up a sandwich for himself, and a small container of strawberries for his mom, her favorite. When he walked in, she was folding laundry in front of the TV. He handed her the fruit. She looked up, tired but soft.
You remembered?
Of course.
He sketched her in that moment, the curve of her spine as she leaned forward, the creases in her hand, the shadow of the remote across her knee. He didn't show her the drawing, not yet. He was saving it for the portfolio. He titled it Home. He had no idea it would be the last piece he'd scan, because the next day it all fell apart. Not because he did something wrong, but because he fit the picture they had in their heads of who does wrong. And it all began with a sketchbook, a bag of strawberries, and the sound of tires screaming down the street. It happened on a Thursday, late afternoon. That kind of sun that makes you forget, just for a second, that anything bad could happen. The kind of air that feels warm on your back, safe, still. Khalil had just left the library. He double-checked the flash drive. His portfolio, scanned, saved, perfect. He zipped up his backpack, held his sketchbook close, and started walking home. But first, he stopped at Martinez Market. He always did. Chips, chocolate bar, strawberries, for his mom.
Working on something big?
Scholarship stuff.
Good luck, mijo.
He had taken 4 steps, maybe 5, then screech, tires, fast, loud. 2 police cruisers, no sirens, just blue lights and presents. Too much presents.
On the ground, hands where we can see them.
Khalil froze, didn't run, didn't move. Another voice, harsher.
I said get down.
Before he could speak, hands were on him, rough, yanking his arms back, twisting, slamming, face first, concrete. The air punched from his lungs. The bag fell. Strawberries burst open, red juice smearing the sidewalk like fresh blood. The sketchbook dropped. Pages fluttered, charcoal smudged in the wind. One page, his mother asleep on the couch, ripped down the center. One cop to another.
Young black male, blue hoodie, matches the description.
Khalil opened his mouth. He wanted to explain about the library, Miss Gloria, the scholarship, his backpack, his name, but he didn't speak. Not because he was afraid, because he remembered his mother's voice, quiet, firm.
If they ever stop you, baby, Don't argue. Don't run. Don't even move. Stay still. Stay alive.
So he stayed still, cheek burning on the pavement, heart thudding in his ears. They patted him down, found the art glove, black, smooth, the kind artists wear to avoid smudges. One officer held it up like a weapon. The other snapped a photo. A voice through the radio.
Robbery on 47th, GameStop. Suspect ran south. Blue hoodie. You fit the description.
I was at the library.
You can explain that downtown.
No one asked his name. No one checked the camera footage. No one opened the backpack. The car door opened. A hand pushed his head down. He caught one last glimpse. His sketchbook lying on the sidewalk, open, exposed, pages fluttering like flags waving for help. Then the door slammed, and the world went quiet again. Inside the cruiser, Khalil stared out the window, chest tight, fingers numb. No cuffs had ever touched him before. No one had ever looked at him like that before, like he was already guilty. But none of that mattered. Not his art, not his dream, not the truth. Because to them, he looked like the ending they already had in mind. He was processed, booked, fingerprinted. No phone call, no lawyer, just hours of waiting, under cold lights, in cold silence. And the first time he met his public defender was 10 minutes before the hearing. Mr. Hayes, gray suit, tired eyes, folder in one hand, phone in the other. He didn't sit, didn't ask Khalil anything meaningful, just flipped through a few pages. Then asked,
"Anything you want to say before we go in?"
I was at the library. Miss Gloria saw me. There's footage.
The lawyer nodded like he barely heard.
"We'll see what we can do."
Then the door opened, and they walked into the courtroom, into a story that had already been written. Without him, without truth, without care. And in that moment, Khalil realized he only had one call to make, and it wasn't to his mother. The phone was old, the kind mounted to a cold gray wall in a hallway that always smelled of bleach and despair. It buzzed when it was your turn.
"You get one call. Make it quick."
The guard said, not unkind, but not gentle either. Khalil stood slowly. His wrists weren't cuffed, but they still felt heavy, like the weight of what had been taken hadn't left his bones. He walked to the phone, lifted the receiver, and stared at the keypad. There was only one number he knew by heart, and it wasn't his mom's. She couldn't take collect calls. She'd already sold the TV to pay for his court fees. What more could she do? So he dialed the number she'd made him memorize at 10 years old, the one he'd never used, not once, until now. The line rang in Washington, D.C. At the podium stood Luther Pryor, the U.S. Attorney General, the top law enforcement official in the country, sharp suit, flag pin, words like justice, reform, and equity rolling from his tongue. The cameras flashed. The press leaned in. Our department remains committed to fairness. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Buzzed again. Same unknown number. Something about it made him pause. He raised a hand, cleared his throat.
Excuse me.
Then he walked off stage, into a quiet hallway with beige walls and fluorescent light that hummed too loud. He answered.
This is Luther Pryor. Who's calling?
A silence, then a breath, then a voice, low, unsteady, familiar.
It's me, your son. I need help.
Luther froze, not because he didn't recognize the voice, but because everything he had walked away from was now calling him back. Every unopened birthday card, every silence at Christmas, every not now and I'll call back later. It all lived in that one breath. He didn't speak right away, and on the other end, Khalil almost hung up. But then,
Where are you?
Fulton County, juvenile lockup.
What happened?
They said I robbed a GameStop. I didn't. I was at the library. They won't listen. They gave me life, no parole.
Luther pressed a hand against the wall. The hallway felt colder, quieter. He didn't reach for a lawyer or a press secretary or a speech. He reached for a chair and sat alone, because in that moment, he was no longer the Attorney General. He was just a father, hearing his son fall apart through a 4-inch plastic receiver. That night, Luther didn't go home, didn't sleep, didn't turn the lights on in his office. He just sat there in the dark, surrounded by drafts of speeches about fairness, stacks of reports titled Justice Reimagined, all of it useless now, because for all the reforms, all the systems he helped build, he couldn't protect his own son. The system hadn't just failed, it had swallowed his child whole, and Luther knew if he wanted to get Khalil out, he wouldn't just have to fight the machine, he'd have to take it apart. And by morning, he wasn't planning another press conference. He was planning a war. Luther didn't go home, didn't change clothes, didn't speak to his staff. He went back to his office at the Department of Justice, alone, with the weight of a father, not a title. He opened his laptop, typed the name slowly, Khalil Dawson, case number 1245JD, Fulton County. The file loaded, line by line, image by image, and almost immediately, the cracks appeared, the traffic cam photo, metadata altered, shadows didn't match the sun that day, license plates in the background were too clean, too sharp. The glove found in Khalil's bag? Originally marked inconclusive, now labeled probable match. Same glove artists use every day. He cross-checked the forensic lab's notes. This wasn't the first time their language had shifted in favor of conviction. It was a pattern. Then he pulled up the judge's record. Roland Pierce. Luther's screen filled with numbers. Hundreds of juvenile cases, fast-tracked, rushed. 94% of them young black males, maximum sentences, minimal evidence, defense objections routinely overruled. This wasn't one bad call. This was a system, sharpened into habit, disguised as procedure, fueled by silence. By morning, the floor of Luther's office was covered in printed reports, sentencing charts, case files, lab memos, courtroom transcripts. He didn't see paperwork. He saw sons, daughters, grandchildren, our children, turned into numbers, then discarded. And he thought, if this is what they did to Khalil, how many others never had the chance to call anyone? That afternoon, Luther made one call. Professor Matthews, retired, still honest. Matthews had taught him tort law and ethics, had always warned,
"You don't work for the law. You work for the people the law forgets."
They met at a quiet cafe near the DOJ building. Luther looked tired, hollow.
I need you to be honest. If it were your son, and you found this, what would you do?
Matthews stirred his coffee, didn't look up.
I'd remember why I became a lawyer, and I'd burn the whole thing down if I had to.
That night, Luther returned to DOJ. No press, no cameras, just purpose. He called 4 attorneys, young, smart, unhardened, still believing that justice could mean something. Sarah, Marcus, Daniela, Jamal. They met in a small conference room, phones off, blinds drawn. Luther looked them in the eyes.
You report only to me. You speak of this to no one. And we start here, Judge Roland Pierce. Every case, every file, every name.
He handed them flash drives, color-coded, labeled only with numbers.
Start with Khalil Dawson, but don't stop there.
That night, something shifted, not just in the building, but in him, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't speaking like a politician. He was moving like a father, fighting for the children the system had already chosen to forget. And while Luther was preparing his case from the top, inside the walls of the detention center, Khalil had already begun his own kind of resistance. The walls were always the same, gray, still, closing in just a little more every day. Inside the Fulton County Juvenile Detention Center, time didn't pass. It dragged. No clocks in the cells, no windows wide enough to matter, just buzzers and orders and lights that never fully turned off. Khalil didn't talk much, didn't eat much, didn't sleep right, but he drew, not with pencil at first, with memory. In his head, he redrew every face he passed. Marcus, the older man from laundry duty, with eyes like gospel songs. Deshaun, who sang temptation songs under his breath while sweeping. Carlos, who talked about opening a taco truck with his brothers one day. Tony, who knew every science fiction book from memory. William, who grew greens in a broken mop bucket on the yard. Khalil drew them all, in his mind, line by line, because if the world forgot who they were, he wouldn't. Then one afternoon during rec hour, his cellmate Jamal slid something under his pillow. 5 sheets of paper, real artist stock, not the cheap kind that curled at the edges.
Got it from the library lady. Use it before they take it.
Khalil sat on the edge of the bunk for a long time. Didn't touch the paper right away, just stared at it like it was a door or a mirror. Then he picked up the stub of a pencil and began. First he drew Marcus, standing by the laundry cart, smiling, a poem written by his daughter scribbled in the background. Then Deshaun, headphones around his neck, mop in hand, a lyric on his lips, ain't too proud to beg. Then Carlos, then Tony, then William. Then Khalil drew a boy with a sketchbook, sitting in a courtroom, eyes wide, mouth shut, forgotten. And then he stopped. He folded the drawings carefully, slid them into an envelope. No return address, no name, just one word in pencil on the front. Voices. Miss Lavinia was a retired school teacher who volunteered at the center twice a week, mostly tutoring, mostly ignored. But Khalil watched her, the way she never flinched, the way she always brought extra snacks, the way she looked people in the eyes. He waited until the end of her shift, slipped the envelope into her tote bag, didn't say a word. 2 weeks later, the drawing surfaced, first on a local art collective's blog, then a civil rights newsletter, then social media. People didn't just see drawings, they saw declarations. Each portrait came with a quote, a lyric, a prayer, a note. Marcus, she used to hum gospel while cooking. I still hear it in my sleep. Carlos, all I wanted was a food truck, that's it. A truck? Tony, they took my books, but not the stories. One sketch showed Khalil's mother, hands clenched, eyes red. Caption, she's still praying for me every night. The series was called Inside Voices. It spread like wildfire. Art schools reposted it. Journalists asked questions. Lawyers paid attention. In cities across the country, murals began to appear. Drawings from the inside projected 10 stories tall, and in his cell, Khalil heard none of it. No news, no updates, no likes, no shares, just the hum of the vents, the scrape of a tray. Until one day during the library hour, a new inmate passed him a folded piece of paper. Inside was one sentence. People out there are starting to hear us. They see what you drew. They see us. Khalil held the note in both hands, then folded it again and tucked it into the spine of his sketchbook. He didn't smile, didn't cry, just whispered to the space around him. Miss Lavinia was a retired school teacher who volunteered at the center twice a week, mostly tutoring, mostly ignored. But Khalil watched her, the way she never flinched, the way she always brought extra snacks, the way she looked people in the eyes. He waited until the end of her shift, slipped the envelope into her tote bag, didn't say a word. 2 weeks later, the drawings surfaced, first on a local art collective's blog, then a civil rights newsletter, then social media. People didn't just see drawings, they saw declarations. Each portrait came with a quote, a lyric, a prayer, a note. Marcus. She used to hum gospel while cooking. I still hear it in my sleep. Carlos. All I wanted was a food truck. That's it. A truck. Tony. They took my books, but not the stories. One sketch showed Khalil's mother, hands clenched, eyes red. Caption, she's still praying for me every night. The series was called Inside Voices.
You can lock us up, but you can't erase who we are.
He kept drawing, kept giving names to faces, kept remembering, because in a place built to take everything from you, your story is the one thing they can't steal. And while Khalil kept drawing from the inside, the world on the outside was no longer quiet. It started as a whisper, a shared post, a sketch reposted on a blog no one famous followed, but then another and another, until the whisper turned into an echo, and the echo became a wave. Inside Voices wasn't just a project anymore, it was a mirror. And people, black folks from Birmingham to Baltimore, they saw themselves in it. Mothers saw sons, aunties saw nephews, elders saw the grandchildren they helped raise. They saw tired eyes, hands pressed to plexiglass, dreams folded into paper, and most of all, they saw truth. Khalil's drawings reached places he would never go, onto flyers, onto protest signs, onto T-shirts that read, "You can't erase us." A mural went up in Harlem, then one in Oakland. In Detroit, a local gallery cleared a whole wall for the exhibit. In D.C., a teacher printed out the portraits and taped them across her classroom ceiling. So my students remember who's still waiting for justice. But it wasn't just art lovers, it was grandmothers, bus drivers, teachers, teenagers, people who didn't always speak out. But now they were speaking loud, because what happened to Khalil had happened to someone they loved, or almost did, or still could. On Capitol Hill, the conversation began to shift. What started as background noise became headlines. New York Times, teen artists' sketches sparked national reckoning. NPR, Inside Voices, the art from prison walls that won't stay silent. CNN, anonymous portraits expose deep cracks in juvenile justice system. Law students across the country printed the sketches, held silent sit-ins in law schools, lined the steps of courthouses with candles and copies, each holding one sign. "We see you, Khalil." In Atlanta, a group of mothers marched in white, holding framed prints, no chanting, no yelling, just walking. One of them, her voice steady through the mic, spoke not just for Khalil, but for all their boys.
"We taught our sons to be quiet, to survive, but maybe it's time we stop surviving and start being heard."
Back inside DOJ, Luther stood in front of his task force. They had uncovered dozens of cases, all with the same pattern, same judge, same silence, same erasure.
It's not just Khalil. It never was.
He knew then this wasn't about saving one child. It was about tearing down every lie the system had learned to tell itself. He drafted a report, attached case files, annotated every buried piece of evidence. But that wasn't enough, because this wasn't about facts anymore. It was about feeling. It was about witnessing. So he made a choice. He clicked export, saved Khalil's art, Khalil's face, onto the cover page of the DOJ briefing. He let the country see the boy the courts had tried to make invisible. The day of the hearing, the Capitol was full, not with politicians, but with people, black people. Some came from church, still in Sunday white. Some came from night shifts, still in work boots. Some brought canes. Some brought kids. They didn't come for drama. They came to witness. One protester held up a giant print of Khalil's sketchbook. The caption read, "He never stopped drawing, so we won't stop marching." And when Luther took the podium, he didn't speak like a man trying to protect his office. He spoke like a father, like a brother, like a man who had finally stopped lying to himself.
We built a system that punishes children for surviving, that silences truth when it doesn't come in the language we expect, that rewards speed over fairness. And in that process, we lost not just justice, but memory.
The room was silent, not empty, but reverent, because that day, something sacred was being acknowledged, that Khalil's life mattered, that his art mattered, that our children mattered, and for the first time, Khalil would walk into a courtroom where someone was ready to listen. The courtroom was different this time. There were windows, sunlight, air that didn't feel like judgment. Khalil walked in not in cuffs, but in a clean shirt. Too big, but clean. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a boy who had waited too long to be heard. Behind him sat people, his mother, Nina, with both hands over her mouth. Luther, tight suit, looser shoulders. A row of law students who'd printed his drawings. An elder who held a cane in one hand and a sketch in the other. And in front, Judge Diana Martinez, a woman with eyes that didn't look through you, but into you. She adjusted her glasses, spoke slow, deliberate.
We will now hear the appeal of Mr. Khalil Dawson.
The lawyers laid it bare, not just mistakes, manipulations, footage altered, evidence buried, connections concealed. Then came the voice, a witness, hidden behind a privacy screen, voice distorted, but words clear, cutting. Elena Vargas, court clerk, the woman who used to type it all down, now finally telling her part. She spoke of how files were pulled early, how protocols were bypassed, how Judge Pierce requested the case personally, days before it was even assigned. She paused, then said what needed to be said.
He knew that boy was innocent, and he chose silence anyway.
The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. Silence spoke louder. Judge Martinez took a breath, folded her hands, looked at Khalil.
Mr. Dawson, before I give my ruling, do you have anything to say?
Khalil stood, thin, quiet, but steady. He turned not just to the judge, but to the room, to the world, and said,
I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to make art. But if what happened to me helped someone else, maybe it was worth it.
He sat down, didn't look down, didn't fidget. He just waited, and Judge Martinez didn't pause.
Based on overwhelming new evidence, including proof of misconduct, this court vacates the prior conviction. Mr. Khalil Dawson, you are free to go.
There was no eruption, no shouting, no camera flash, just a mother, quietly collapsing into her own hands, a lawyer exhaling for the first time in months, a boy finally breathing. Khalil stood, turned, and walked out of the courtroom, not as a defendant, not as a number, but as a person. And later that night, in a quiet room with faded posters and old memories, he stared at a blank piece of paper pinned to the wall, ready to begin again. The room was small. The posters on the wall had curled at the edges. The bookshelf leaned a little to the left. Dust clung to corners like memories that never left. But to Khalil, it felt like home. He dropped his backpack by the bed, sat down slowly, let the silence settle around him, not the kind that presses on your chest, the kind that lets you breathe. There was no crowd now, no judge, no lawyers, just a boy and a desk and a wall. Pinned to that wall, one blank sheet of paper, clean, still, waiting. Khalil walked toward it, opened his sketchbook, pulled out a fresh pencil. He didn't rush, didn't start with lines or faces. He just stood there, looking, because this time, no one else would decide what came next. Not a cop, not a courtroom, not a system, just him, just this paper, just the truth he still carried. And maybe that's what freedom really is, not just walking out of a cell, but walking back into your life with a pencil in hand. Some stories end in fire, in fury, in a fight. But Khalil's? It ends in stillness, in the quiet scratch of pencil against paper, in a boy reclaiming not just his future, but his voice, because they tried to erase him, his name, his dreams, his art. But they couldn't. And now the world is watching, and he's just getting started. If this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Share it, speak it, stand with every young black artist who is told to stay quiet. Because their stories matter. Because our stories matter. One sketch, one voice, one truth at a time.